we talked about the broad left and hope something coming out there. I mean, the collective, the grouping of independents that have been sort of working together and supporting each other, I do have a lot of hope that this will form into a party at some point. What that looks like, who knows? But there needs to be. If we don't do something on the left that's meaningful, the fascists will absolutely just fill that void, and people like Farage and stuff will make hay. I saw it again in the chat there, people talking about young lads especially looking at reform and that sort of reactionary politics. I don't really blame them. It
Nope,
is an
me neither.
absolute failing of the left of not being able to coherently talk about people's material position and what we can do that has let them down. It's the left's been far too busy. I mean, sort of before Corbyn managed to unify us for a few years. But the last problem is we just tear each other's throats out rather than getting a broad consensus and saying, okay, let's have them arguments behind the scenes rather than just trying to murder each other over which minutiae of policy or how we get there is implemented.
Yeah, I agree. Like, but yeah, and I think the big thing that's missing, is especially for young lads, is it's just being a member of a trade union. Like, I hate to just be like incredibly leftoid pilled on this, but just if we had these people rooted in community, I think broadly across young people in this country, regardless of gender, but young people are crying out for community. They're crying out for a social contract, right? They're crying out for anything other than the kind of world that we're living in at the moment where there isn't any hope. And in the absence of the community that a trade union gives you, or a council estate gives you, right? The lack of council housing is obviously massively to blame for this too. There's no community that's being given to them, so their only option is to fight within the system that we've got, which is that's catnip for the Gary V's of this world, the Andrew Tates of this world, to sell them on, well, actually, if you're living in an individualist world, your only option is to fight as an individual, and therefore to completely abandon all collectivism and to buy into this kind of Randian libertarian narrative. And this is why I think that they're turning towards reform. And again, women and young women are more unionized now. The only group in society that's trending upward in trade union membership is women, and they're being sold. I mean, they've got the sorts of good stuff that Labour are giving them, things like the social care, fair pay agreement, lots of things in terms of paid childcare, which is great and we need it. But if we don't have a voice that can be given to young men collectively to fight collectively for something better, that's a generation that will lose and they won't come back.
Absolutely. And yeah, the trade unions are absolutely the key to this. So I have done a lot of work with the National Veterinary Branch of Unite, the Veterinary Union branch. They've got recognition for the first time in one of the workplaces in South Wales. And I mean, this is obviously a sector which is heavily dominated by women, but the pay gap is about 40% in most workplaces, which is absolutely staggering. And I think we did some research just going through, putting some comms together. Out of every pound in bonuses paid, 89 pence that goes to a man. Again, in a sector which is dominated by women, how are people not absolutely up in arms on this? But yeah, Valley Vets in South Wales, I'll give them a quick shout out as well because it might be worth people going up and look at what they're doing. But they had the first negotiations ever. They didn't get anywhere. The managers there offered about 1% or something ridiculous. And then at the end of it, I think because they've never negotiated with a union before, just thought, oh, well, okay, we didn't get there. We'll come back in a year's time. We'll see if we can go again. Or instead, what they've got is the balloted rejected the pay offer by 100% rejection with a high 90% turnout. And then we balloted consultatively on strike. I say we, I feel very, very invested in this now, but they balloted to strike. That was 98% in favour of strike. And then done the postal ballot to jump through the Tories' legal hoops. And that's returned again high 90% to strike, high 90% turnout, which any sector in the economy, with well organised sector, would be absolutely astounded with, be made up with. And it shows that there is growth in the union, but it's not where people would think in historically well organised places. Because these people, I mean, I love working with sectors in hospitality, the vets, stuff like that, because they're not stuck in them old grooves of how trade unions used to operate, and they can operate outside of that using social media and different ways of doing comms and speaking about things and actually addressing people's concerns now in the language people understand. So yeah, you're right, and the trade union there in that sector has grown massively over the last 2 years. I think gone from 200 members nationally to about 1,400 now.
That's wild. That's really good. And things I think somebody in chat, a couple of good points made in chat about this is just that first of all, Labour have abandoned saying that workers' rights can be good for young people. They've abandoned young people. The nature of how our electoral system works means that, for better for worse, definitely for worse, but obviously for the sake of winning, Labour have abandoned, the votes of people who aren't in their 50s, 60s, 70s, because that's the big cohort that you need to win over. And so they're going more on kind of the immigration and cultural stuff rather than talk about the basics of, the world of work and the people who do all of the productive labour in this country. And second of all, somebody mentioned that young men need like a collective identity, or they're searching for a collective identity to join, and trade unionism can help us focus that towards a goal of better wages for everybody. Although I guess actually, one thing I would say is that the current polling that we have shows that the biggest kind of sector of reform voters we have amongst young people is actually the younger generation. It's the generation below Gen Z. So 16, 17-year-olds are the ones who have the highest support for reform amongst young men. But I have a feeling that once they start getting real jobs and they start having to get into the world of work, we will see a drift leftwards. But that won't happen if we don't create the conditions for them to be able to find a movement to join, if you see what I mean.
Absolutely. I mean, most people got their political education through the trade unions back in the 50s, 60s, 70s. She absolutely knew what she was doing when she went to war with them. If you remove a sort of class consciousness from people, then it makes it very easy to divide people up. Someone else has mentioned that the working class as an identity has lost its pride or value. I think in some parts of the country, absolutely. I mean, I've got the words working class tattooed on my arm as well. I'm very proud of my background and my position in society. But someone else has said working class doesn't exist. But yeah, it is. We've got to define ourselves on whether we have to go to work and sell our labour, or we own stuff, and that's the only thing that should divide us. Whether we earn our living through just owning things and generating money off exploiting other people, whether that be through landlordism or exploitative labour practices, or whether we've got to sell our money, sell our time for money to keep a roof over our heads.
Exactly. I made this point when I was talking with Curtis the other day. I made this explicit point. It was just right. Working class as a British identity, in like the social class sense of the word, that's gone. That's completely gone out of the new generations coming through, especially since we hollowed out in the industrial base in the Thatcher and Blair years. We just have an entire sector of society where most people just work in the service sector, whether that's in high-paying or low-paying jobs. This class distinction between kind of blue-collar and white-collar, that doesn't exist for the new generations. So we have to, rather than making things be about other kind of social cultural issues, which tend to be how they divide themselves now, we have to teach them Marxism. We have to teach them the difference between those who sell their labour for a wage and those who own the means of production, and foment that distinction, that explicit material base of class distinction in these people's heads, so that that's how they view the value of what their role is in society. And that's how we create community, and how we build people who engage with politics through materialism rather than through anything else.
Yeah, and I think people think that would turn people off. I've just spent the last 5 weeks wandering around at hustings talking about worker ownership and common ownership of the things, and no one's found any problem with that. I'm just simplifying the language of Marx. It's not upset anyone. I've not had him screaming at me I'm a communist.
But yeah, Gary Stevenson, the economist, he does this too. As he essentially talks in explicitly Marxist terms without using any Marxist terminology. I see that's exactly how, and the worker ownership is a really good way of talking about that. I literally remember having a conversation when I worked in a call center. Yes, I think she must have been in her late 50s. She was this woman called Susan. And we're just having this discussion. She was like, I don't know what communism is. I don't know what communism is. And I think my friend walked in wearing a Karl Marx t-shirt. And I just said, right, well, if you without the wood for woods to become a chair, somebody has to apply labour to that. But if you get paid less than the amount of appreciation and value between the wood and the chair, someone else has your money. And she instantly understood that. She instantly understood what I meant when I said that.
I do exactly the same on some of our trade union courses. I ask them what profit is, and they all come out with the usual, it's money left over. I'm like, nah, it's the money they've stolen from you.
Exactly.
People
100%.
instantly get it. Oh yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, and ownership's everything. If we own things, we're going to be in a much less precarious position. We're going to see a greater share of the wealth. We're probably not going to be getting disciplined for being ill. we're probably going to have better work-life balance. We're probably not going to force ourselves into work as much. If sort of new technology comes in, we're probably not going to make half our mates redundant. We're probably going to look at just let's work half the time. If we don't need half the people, let's just cut the hours we work and keep the same wages. It's absolutely key to the future. I mean, with AI and automation stuff, again, it's another thing I speak about a lot on the courses we teach. I ask people, is it a good or bad thing? And I think inherently most people tend towards, oh, it's bad, it's going to cost jobs. It's just technology. It's neither positive or negative. It's who owns it and how it's applied is where the problems come in. So if we own this stuff, then it absolutely will have the outcomes that we were all promised hundreds of years ago, with more leisure time, and we'll work half a day and mess around in the afternoons or whatever. I think when people understand that and see that as a positive, I mean, people still see it as idealistic, because since at least 79 and probably before a bit, we've known nothing but this rampant neoliberalism, which is just exploiting us and sapping all hope out of us.